Good Saturday morning to everybody, and welcome to Legal Notes with Charter Oak Law Group with Marianne Charron and Ned Barron. I'm Gary Byron. Good morning, folks.
Good morning.
How are you?
Fantastic.
What I wanted to talk about today is something called undue influence. Undue influence.
It ties in with our show from last week where we talked about capacity or incapacity, right?
Well, and that's where I got it from because we were running out of time last week. So I was like, you know what? Let me just table this until this week. All right, so let's start off with what exactly is undue influence?
You want to try that one?
Sure. Well, in simple terms, it's when somebody potentially has diminished capacity.
Yeah.
And they are open to suggestions by other people to make a decision that they otherwise would not have made themselves.
And I think that's really important. So you have to say, okay, think of a decision you know. So let's talk about wills. We talked about wills a lot last week, right? You have 4 children. They are, the legal term is the natural objects of your bounty. Okay. Assuming you have bounty. But they are the natural objects. So you would say, okay, so you would want them each to share equally. However, you end up giving everything to your neighbor. Did your neighbor unduly influence you so that you would make a decision that you normally, under normal circumstances, wouldn't make?
Is this being made under duress?
Well,
No.
it could be duress, but may not
be,
be, right? Because Ned and I have certainly seen, I want to say there's a pattern almost of behavior when people are unduly influenced, right?
Yeah, I have a crazy case that happened a long time ago when I had just become an attorney. And I moved to Danbury and I rented an apartment that was on the top floor of this elderly gentleman. He was probably 80 years old, or 82 or something, on the second floor of his house. And he had this woman who was not a family member. Well, let me back up a second. When I first moved in there, he had a cousin who would come and help him with laundry and stuff like that and help prepare meals for him, pre-prepare meals and all that. And then this woman who had been a renter of his, he owned this property that had these rental cabins on it. Plus he owned this property that I was renting from him that had like 5 acres. This was his family farm, had been his family farm growing up. Long story short, the woman who was renting from him started weaving her way into his life. And she began by excluding, putting a wedge in between him and his cousin who was helping him. So then she could start taking over. And then his needs became greater and greater, and this woman was there now. This is basically her full-time job now, was to take care of him. And I remember one night hearing this woman say to him in very loud voice, "If you don't do it, you're going to go to a nursing home. I'm not going to take care of you any longer. You're going to be in a nursing home." And this is the last. This guy was born in this house. He was born on this property, and he wanted to die on it. And this woman was not only unduly influencing him, right? That was the part of where she was putting the wedge in between him and his family and weaving her way into his life. But now it escalated to duress, as you had mentioned that now he was being forced to make a choice. Whether he leaves her the property.
In this case, it had to do with leaving the property.
Did he have kids?
No, he didn't. He was never married. But I found out, and this is, I was just fresh out of law school, didn't know the first thing about this, right? Now, if this, it would be totally different now based on my experience, how I would have handled this. But how I handled it was, I didn't do anything.
No, that's not true. You did.
Right.
That's not true because she eventually kicked him out of the apartment.
Well,
because you were trying to help him.
No, well, that's true. Well, actually, so one thing that I did
Good thing I remember the story.
One thing that I did do is
Where
that
we'd be without you.
And one thing that it was a long time ago.
Another show. No.
It was a really long time ago. One of the things that I did do was I was a brand new attorney, brand new to the Danbury legal scene. And I had found out who the old gentleman, my landlord, found out who his attorney was, who was doing
his longtime attorney.
His longtime attorney who had been doing his estate planning and who was going to be changing this will and all that. And so I went to one of the partners of the law firm that I worked at, and I said, "Hey, there's something going on here, and do you know this attorney?" "Yep, I know this attorney." I didn't want to be the person just to reach out and say, "Hey, your client's being unduly influenced." So I asked this attorney who knew this other attorney to contact him, say, "Hey, there might be something going on with your client," and that attorney never responded. So I did. Today would be a completely different story. I would call this attorney myself, and if that attorney didn't respond, then I would call the Adult Protective Services.
So I guess my question is, how do you find out the details of this story? Because it sounds like that guy could not speak on his own behalf. She's not going to speak on his behalf. She's going to give her version of the story, which sounds, a little shady. So then how does the truth end up coming out?
Usually in court. So the person dies, and then the will, right? And they're like, what happened to the property? Who gets it? Oh, the neighbor. Oh, this woman, in Ned's example. And that's the beginning of a will contest. That's the beginning of going into probate court and saying that my father, whoever, was unduly influenced. And, so that's usually when it comes out. Sometimes you can catch it earlier. Sometimes medical professionals will catch it, right? Because you have somebody who is bringing someone to the doctor's office, and you start to, we have had medical professionals have reached out to social service agencies and say, I think that there's an issue here. There appears to be somebody who has made themselves, indispensable, or seems to be moving into this person's life who may not have their best interests, right? So that we have seen that for sure.
Yeah, I think I know.
You have
one
another
example.
story?
Well,
he has another story.
No, but I can think of one example, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but a doctor raising that question because the person, the helper, who is not a family member and who would not have normally been
correct,
the person who would be helping them out, was asking questions like, well, do you think that she has capacity to sign a will? Right?
Yes.
Asking the medical professional.
That's correct.
Right, the doctor. Do you think, right, and obviously that's going to raise a red flag with the doctor. Why are you asking that question? If you're just an aide, right? If you're just the helper, well, that's...
We've had banking people who have called social services anonymously because they're bringing that person to the bank to withdraw money. All right. So you have things like that.
It's a red flag.
It's a red flag. So it helps, if they go back to the same branch regularly. It's a little harder if the person is more savvy and will take them to different Bank of America branches. I'm just saying, for example, I did have one case where the aide was taking care of someone and she convinced him to marry her sister. So she became the spouse, and he did a will, leaving everything to his new spouse. Now, mind you, after they got married, I'm sorry, I forgot to add that he bought a property in Florida where they were going to retire to. And after the marriage, she moved to Florida and he was here. Okay? So there are patterns. And these people, they know they've got time. They can do it. They work very slowly. And we see this, unfortunately, more often than we would like to acknowledge.
In that story, though, the writing was on the wall.
Well, see, the thing is, yes, in retrospect, right? So you asked me, when do you notice it?
In Florida.
Correct. So at the end of the day, so he passes away, and now we see the pattern. But in the midst of it, I mean, it doesn't matter how old you are. You can marry who you want to. And even if I don't like my father's choice or someone's choice, the truth is we try to honor people's individual choices, whether we judge them as appropriate or not. I mean, that's kind of what makes people unique and interesting. And, autonomy is a value that's really important to all of us. So when he was choosing to get married, I don't know if there were red flags I wasn't invited to the wedding, but, right. But
was anybody invited to the wedding?
That's a good question. I don't know. But
maybe there wasn't a wedding. Maybe they just said they got married.
You can choose who you want to hang out with. So it's hard initially to catch these things.
This sounds this sounds like a movie of the week. How common is this, though? How common is undue influence?
Well, if you don't leave anything to the kids when you're in court, it happens. I was talking to Ned about this. It happens frequently in second marriages. And not because they are necessarily unduly influenced, but there is somebody else who you are now married to, or you are in long-term relationship with, and you choose to leave everything to help that person. You want to support the person who they've shared the rest of their days with. And so what happens is, again, you get to the point of the will, the children think that they're getting their share of dad's money, and it goes to the stepmother who they really liked until that moment. And they no longer like her anymore. And they'll say, you unduly influenced him. Well, that's what Ned and I were talking about a little earlier was there influence? Was it undue influence?
Right. And that's the distinction that is really hard, especially in a second marriage. That's the hard part, right?
Yeah.
I think we talked a while ago about Casey Kasem and his
I was biting my tongue not to bring that back up because I brought that up now a few times, but I did think of that when you were saying
right, and so
but it's true,
right, and that's a really extreme side of it, but I think to answer your question about how prevalent is undue influence. It's what Marianne was there's that nuance between, well, there is always influence, I think, when we're in relationships with people, whether we're a child or a caregiver
correct, right?
Or a friend and all that, right? That we all influence each other. So the key is undue, right? Going back to the beginning question, but for that conversation that you had or that pattern of conversations that you had, are you making a different decision now than you would have if you hadn't have had those conversations with that person before?
And it ties into the incapacity that we were talking about last week. So one of the elements, there's 4 legal elements, but the first one is, do you have someone who is subject to influence? Well, if you are kind of, if you don't have capacity, so if your cognition and your capabilities and, are such that those are the people who are more easily influenced, right? There's someone who are subject to influence. We would like to say that here we are, the 3 of us, and we have our capabilities, and we're not. I might listen respectfully to your side of the story and make my own decision. But for somebody who is in the beginning stages of Alzheimer's, somebody who has, declining health and capacity and cognition, they're the ones who are subject, who we're really looking to see who are subject to the influence. Okay. So. Yeah.
And I think probably one of the most prevalent is, or at least, at least this is how I see this, when there's not an overt scheme in place, and there are people who it's a business where there are, I don't want to say gangs, but there are organized groups who provide services to elderly people for the express purpose of getting in there and exerting undue influence and extracting as much
scams.
Right.
Scammers, and sometimes they're caregivers, right? So caregivers can, have a plan of action, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right?
But one of the things that I kind of want to focus on is in this moment is that when you have an elderly person who has diminished capacity, they know it. They know they need help.
Right.
That we see this where they change their will because they are essentially living in the moment and thinking about the moment and thinking, this is the person who is helping me to get through every day. They're helping me with my grocery shopping. They're helping me with my doctor's appointments. They're helping me with my bathing. They're helping me with getting up in the morning, providing an invaluable service, right? Can't take that away from anybody who's providing those services. It is a tough job.
Absolutely.
No matter what the situation is.
Yeah, we're not trying to diss caregivers.
Exactly.
Good ones anyway.
Exactly. But
really.
But one of the things about, and this may not be intentional undue influence, but when you have someone who is now dependent on a caregiver, that they are so grateful to be kept in the house, to be kept clean, to be kept comfortable, to be kept fed, that they want to help that person. And if that caregiver talks to them about, how they're struggling financially, or if their kids are struggling financially, how, which is caregivers do not get paid enough. I would say that every day, all day long, they do not get paid enough.
I agree.
And so oftentimes they don't have tons of money or have much money at all, and they are struggling. And so their issues are real, but here's the unintentional undue influence is that the elderly person that is now being supported by or is being cared for is now so grateful that they forget about
that they're actually paying them.
The 50, and they also forget about
their kids,
right? The 50 years or 60 years of their kids. And that all goes by the wayside.
Folks, you are listening to Legal Notes with Marianne Charron and Ned Barron. You can contact them at 860-570-1229. Again, 860-570-1229. They are online at charteroaklaw.com. Once again, charteroaklaw.com. And coming up in just a few minutes, I'll give you some information on how you can obtain a pretty cool book, actually. I think it's not only informative, it's actually pretty darn entertaining. It's called Trial and Heirs, Heirs. We'll play on words there. I'll give you all the details in a few minutes. No, please continue, though.
So what that means is that person, the caregiver, we're using caregivers in this example that Ned was talking about, has what's called the opportunity. Right? So the opportunity now exists. And so when you're in court, that's one of the things. Does this person have the opportunity to influence? Well, yeah, because you're there with that person maybe 24/7, 12 hours a day, for example, or something like that. And you are talking about, 'cause how many times can you watch Judge Judy on TV? You're going to talk about something. And usually it's about, tell me a little bit about yourself. What's going on? How and they end up knowing. They read the mail. They know what comes in. They know the real estate tax bill comes in. They see the bank statements that come in the mail. They open the mail for that person. They know what that person has. And so now you're combining information, right? Now that person is so grateful and, may not even necessarily be grateful, but certainly beholden to them for their care because they can't care for themselves and do those things. So, you have to take a look at all of that. And that's why I think it's hard in second marriages because your father or mother chose to marry that person for whatever reason.
Most people have second marriages.
That's correct. That's absolutely correct. And
speak of like celebrity, second marriages and undue influence. Well, there's that Anna Nicole Smith. You probably remember her.
When she married a 90-year-old.
Right. And she was 26 or however old she was,
You mean that wasn't true love?
I don't know. I wasn't there exactly.
Who are we to judge? Okay.
But
well, okay,
she
maybe
did
we
end
were.
up with
All
a
right.
lot of money. To the exclusion of his children.
The son. Wasn't the son fighting her? I forget. I think it was
would
the
be
son.
too, guys.
All right. Who was, I don't know, maybe her same age or something like that, right? Yeah. So
much older.
Although, look what happened to her. I mean, she ended up passing away, too. Her son died, and I think she couldn't cope with that. And then she died like a year or two after.
I know. It's a very sad story.
But she did leave a daughter, and that who was
an heir,
right? The daughter of the husband, right?
I think so.
I didn't know she had a daughter.
Yeah, it was in the news recently. Yeah, I thought she did. I don't know. Maybe it's in the book.
There you go, folks. Got to get the book.
Read that chapter.
You're gonna get it free. I'll tell you about it in a minute.
So yeah. I mean, I recently.
But there are times, though. There are times when. Granted, it's rare, but when a person does have children and a caregiver who's separate and does consciously give the caregiver money, where the child would sit there and say, "Oh, no, you got this wrong. He must not have been. Look, he's got children, and I'm sure you'll straighten it all out." And then you got to go back and tell that child that this was made in conscious mind here,
Yeah, we've had to do that. I mean, I certainly have had, Ned and I, when we have someone who has capacity and they come to us and they say, I want to change my will and give everything to fill in the blank, neighbor, caregiver, one of the 4 children, right? I mean,
or niece, nephew, right? It could be
anybody, to the exclusion of other family members. We try really hard to make sure that they understand what could possibly happen. And I try to say to them, look, I understand you want to do this kind of thing, but you need to have an appreciation for the fact of what's going to happen after you die. You could be leaving the person that you claim to love, I won't say claim to love, with a mess. You could be leaving them with a just natural disaster in terms, of things legally. And is this really what you want? So let's talk about making sure we give something to your children. Let's talk about making sure that I have a medical record. Let's make sure, and so that, because I can anticipate, we can anticipate when there's going to be a battle down the road. Yeah. So.
And there's a real tension when you're speaking with a client about that.
Yes.
Because your job as their attorney is to advise and counsel them, but also to carry out their wishes.
That's exactly right.
And so we run the risk of, under those scenarios, that personally we might find it objectionable under the circumstances to say, well, no, there's definitely, you should not do that. Right. But that's a really hard thing to say to a brand new client. Are you sure
you want to do that?
Right. That we have to. But that's what
you're supposed to. You're supposed to guide them. Mm-hmm. This is your.
Let them know what the risks are, right? And so, oftentimes we have people say, "Yeah, that is exactly what I want to do. I am not giving anything to my children because they're fine. They're fine, and I know that this person needs the money." And to be able to support him or herself after I go. And if they have capacity, right?
But can't you then say, then let's bring your children in here so you're not creating an uncomfortable or impossible scenario for me and going so that they don't think I'm from a foreign. Like, what are you talking about? What if you clear the air and get ahead of it with everybody in the same room? Can you do that, or have you ever done that? I've only got a few seconds. So I got to wrap this up and give away the book.
That's a really tough.
That's such a gray area
bring up with a client because basically they could take it as you're saying, I don't think you understand how wrong what you're planning on doing is.
And you need to tell it to your children in front of us, right? So you have to be so careful of that scenario. But I do say, are you sure what the response of your children is going to be?
Well, they're looking to you for guidance anyways. I mean, you do this and deal with all walks of life and do this every day. Others, this is once. The only time they ever go through it. Folks, there is a book I promised you at the beginning of the show that you can obtain absolutely free. And I mean, the book is free and the shipping and handling, all that's free. It's called Trial and Heirs, Heirs. This is not only is it an informative book, it's actually, it's pretty entertaining. It's written by Andrew Mayoris and his wife, Danielle Mayoris. Celebrity estate planning. It battles that shine a light on the importance of having an estate plan. The first 3 people who write to us and give us feedback about the show, and hopefully maybe even ask a question, will receive a free copy of the book. Now, make sure that you give us your full name and address so that we can ship the book directly to you. So let me give you the email address. It's legalnotes@charteroaklaw.com. Again, email us for that book, legalnotes@charteroaklaw.com. By the way, you can also check out their website. It's simple. It's charteroaklaw.com. Again, charteroaklaw.com. And, of course, the phone number, 860-570-1229. Ask a question. Make an appointment. 860-570-1229. For Marianne Charron and Ned Barron, I'm Gary Byron. Thank you so much for listening to Legal Notes. Until next week, have a good one, everybody. So long.